I honestly don't understand why we don't use them in the West. For some reason, we have it in our heads that using toilet paper is far more hygienic than using a jet to clean your bottom.
Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube video.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds.
Well folks, here we are back in the English countryside, and this week we're going to be answering more of your questions. But before we go any further, I should just remind you that we are putting out Q&As one week and then we return to our sailing vlog the next week. I wanted to mention that because someone in our last Q&A said, what a shame you're not doing your sailing vlogs anymore. We are. Last week's episode was our sailing vlog. Next week's episode is our sailing vlog when we return to our trip up the Java Sea. But as you know, Liz and I are separated by a few thousand miles, and unfortunately I'm having to do my editing on my father's computer, which is not a bad computer, but it's a little bit slower, so editing takes a little bit longer. Plus, of course, it's his computer, so I have to kick him off when I need to do editing. So that's why we're running with this format at the moment. So yeah, next week, more sailing vlogs. But today, your questions and answers.
Rob Benefatti and Simon Mortimer both asked the same question, and that was, have we ever thought, I've had enough, I want to go back to Blighty, getting off the boat, that's it, it's over?
I think these are very good questions because I'm sure it's questions that people who want to start sailing, to start becoming liveaboards, must think about this too. Because there are ups and downs. And as Liz said in our last Q&A, this lifestyle is hard work. And there are times when you think, oh, is it all worth it? Well, of course, when you end up in a beautiful anchorage, it is all worth it. And really, that's what it all comes down to.
To be honest, I don't think we have. It's difficult to say. I certainly haven't, and I don't think Jamie has. Apart from when we came back from Sabah to Lombok, that was that long trip we did a couple of years ago. It was a difficult one, and we'd just come out of the pandemic, and Jamie was going through a bout of anxiety. It was quite a bad one.
This was caused by the feeling of complete detachment from basically my family. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do, is to make that break from your family, especially myself. I have a very close family, I like to think. Certainly compared to some people I've met who can't wait to get away from their various family members, I was really missing mine. And despite having access to all these beautiful anchorages and doing some great sailing across some fantastic seas and so on, there was that side of me that was getting more and more desperate to see the family, was overtaking my desire to be on the boat.
So it did make the trip difficult, and by the end of it he had had enough. But it didn't take very long when we were back in England to start missing Esper again. So I think that was a blip, but on the whole I would say no. And the other thing that you did ask us guys was, how do we deal with it, and is one of us more resilient, and you know, what do we do about it? And what I would say is that we kind of bolster each other. So when one is feeling low, the other will really help to cheer that one up and get us through. I think that's the success of our relationship, is that when things are really bad, we are very good at supporting each other. And I think it's the unit of the two of us that's what makes this work.
Sometimes you get those frustrating times, and most of the time you can rationalise it, I think. When things go wrong, you know that ultimately they'll get better, things will get fixed. But just very occasionally you do have those moments of, not doubt, but just, I think you just get a little bit frustrated with not being able to do things simply, because this lifestyle is anything but simple.
So no, really love this life. I can't imagine ever living on land again.
Christine asks if you had to do a whistle-stop tour of Indonesia and Malaysia, what would be your top 10 must-see anchorages?
Christine, you're asking us to choose from our children, which is our favourite, and can't do it, just cannot do it. Although I do think it's a great idea perhaps for a full episode to talk about our favourite anchorages and why.
It's so difficult, and of course, I guess you really just have to go back to our video clips when we went around Sulawesi to see how amazing some of those anchorages are. But even on the more touristic islands you've seen recently when we were on North Bali, you saw us by the Mimpi Resort in the northwest corner of Bali. That was a really special anchorage, and yet it's on a very sort of touristy area. I'd have to say probably the Mentawai Islands, which run down the west coast of Sumatra. There are some incredible anchorages there. It's difficult to sort of give a top 10. I tend to group them together. So I mentioned Sulawesi. All across that north coast of Sulawesi, when you look at it on a chart, nothing looks anchorable because it's all so deep. And yet, when it actually comes to it, there's sort of anchorages every 30, 40 miles.
Asahan, if you've been watching us a lot, you'll know that we were there for a couple of months, stuck there earlier in the year because we were waiting for the winds to change. And it was one hell of a place to stay, just beautiful. Quiet, tranquil, peaceful, all of those words. Small village, we got to know many of the local people there. A couple of small resorts, got to know the staff and the owners there. All lovely. They don't play music there. It's very quiet, it's very natural. In the morning you're woken up by the sounds of the insects, let alone the birds. I just love Asahan. Southwest corner of Lombok. If you're going to Indonesia, please don't miss it.
What it boils down to for us is the remoteness and the being around nature. That's what makes our anchorages for us. Another example, of course, is the Anambas Islands. You've seen us visit the Anambas Islands twice. Pretty much anywhere you drop the hook in the Anambas Islands is idyllic. But again, it's remote. It's cut away from anywhere. And I think for us, that's what makes our top anchorages.
So Malaysia, very difficult. It's quite different to Indonesia in many ways, but quite similar. But it does incorporate Sabah, which is where we were for the whole of lockdown. And it's one of the places, Jamie and I have decided that if we were ever to leave the sea and go and live on land, we would live in Sabah. It's an incredibly beautiful place with charming, welcoming, friendly people. And it has some spectacular anchorages, some of the best diving in the world. So I would choose as my one anchorage from Sabah, I would choose Bohai Dulang. It's a small atoll on the east coast. It's where a lot of the diving is done in that area. But Bohai Dulang is very out of the way. It's part of a national park. It's difficult to anchor there without permission, but you can do it. We spent a week there, surrounded by beauteous mountains, rainforest. Bohai Dulang itself is home to some Bajau Laut, small Bajau Laut communities that live on their stilted houses or in their boats. That's all, nobody else lives there. Lots and lots of coral and teeming with turtles, just beautiful.
I realise I'm walking half in the shade and half in the sun here. So I'm going to answer the next question with my cap backwards so you can see the truth in my eyes as I answer Salty Lassie's question, who say, I have seen lots of sailing couples where the woman is sent forward to do the anchoring or mooring whilst the bloke stays at the helm, moving that difficult, tricky little chrome throttle up and down. So why does Liz do the anchoring? Is she more muscular than Jamie? Just following popular tradition? Well, I mean, the truth of the matter is that for most of the time, Liz is cooking and cleaning while I do all the heavy lifting work when we're sailing. When we're sailing, Liz tends to just lay down, do her makeup, doesn't really do much work. And so when we get to an anchorage, I'm absolutely exhausted and Liz is fresh as a daisy because she's done nothing. So I think it's only fair that we put her to the front of the boat while I take a rest at the helm. And she, does a bit of muscle work because let's face it, she's doing sweet FA during the day.
To be honest, you know, part of anchoring is being on the helm, particularly in bad weather as you're coming in and going out. You really do need to know what you're doing on the helm. So yeah, he does do that, and I do the front bit, but it's something that's over the years it's developed that way. I can do both, and so can he.
We do swap around sometimes. Of course, if I'm doing the anchoring, you probably don't see it because it's normally me filming.
But this is our system. It works really well for us. We have a kind of telepathic communication about who does what when, and we can do it fast, and we can do it safely, we can do it well that way. So it does work for us that way. I know a lot of boats do it that way, and it does seem as though the man is there being the captain, but it's not like that for us. It just works, and if you're good at one particular job, use that strength and do it.
This is a lovely little spot. I don't think I've actually walked this far. Little footbridge. And no, is this the Slade? No, it's not the Slade, I don't think, which is the little ditch that runs through Saffron Walden. Dry, obviously. Very pleasant walk, this. Okay, on to the next question.
SV Blue Pelican says, what are our thoughts on flopper stoppers? Ugh, my reaction, ugh.
We've never used one, but I have seen one in action.
The theory is that you put your flopper stopper over the side, it balances the boat and it stops it from heeling from side to side too much in an anchorage.
If you imagine there are a bunch of flat aluminium sheets, I suppose, that are hinged, and the idea is that they open and they close. So they open as you go up and then they close as you go down, so it prevents that sideways motion. But when you put it on deck, it's quite a lot of gear. So we never bothered dealing with it. And in fact, if you have the luxury of being able to move, if an anchorage is so uncomfortable, we tend to just say, sod it, let's move on to the next anchorage.
Flopper stoppers, boo, change anchorage, yay.
Back into the sunshine to answer Tom Nelson's question.
Tom Nelson wonders about aluminium catamarans, and he's talking about this because Delos are in the throes of building one right now. He wonders if they're going to be really noisy, pounding through the waves, over the waves, sideways to the waves, all those questions. I don't know. The
problem with answering these kind of questions is that there's only so much we can answer based on our own personal experience. I have sailed catamarans, but I haven't sailed aluminium catamarans. What I can tell you is that in undesirable seas, let's say, sometimes catamarans for me can be extra noisy, and they're just the fiberglass ones. But of course, you know, how much time are you spending in a noisy sea on your aluminium catamaran? Not long, because you're going to be going very quickly. And I think by the time you get to the other end and you drop the hook, you'll have appreciated, you know, sailing across seas at 15 knots. So, yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer that question.
The one thing I would say, though, is that when you're pounding and you've got big waves hitting the side of your boat, I don't really think it makes much difference. It's extremely noisy in our fiberglass monohull. So in a catamaran, is it double the noise? Is it worse? I don't think it is. And to be honest, when you're pounding and you've got big waves hitting you and it's noisy and it's painful, you don't worry so much about the noise. You just want to get there.
We were asked another question, which was how we deploy an anchor on a monohull versus a catamaran, and can we include overlays? Well, of course, no, we can't do that. We don't have a catamaran to do that. And this is an audio podcast first, video second, which is why we don't do overlays.
Mark Cassells has got a question on insurance. He says he's noticed that most mariners nowadays expect at least third-party insurance. My experience is absolutely. You're even asked for fully comprehensive in some places. And coming into Malaysia this time, for the first time, they looked at our insurance and customs, and this hasn't always been the case. So yes, definitely insurance is becoming a bigger and bigger thing. One of the problems you've got over here in this part of the world is people buying boats and just leaving them and never returning to them, or they sink, or they ground or something like that, and the owners can't be found, and they just become wrecks. We've seen a lot of this, and I think it's getting worse certainly probably it did over the 2-year period of lockdown, and the authorities are fed up with having to deal with these abandoned boats everywhere. So I think they now want to make sure that they are insured.
I haven't come across problems with boats being over 20 years old and not getting insurance. What I have come across, however, are solo sailors. It seems as if insurance is much more difficult for solo sailors. So if you are a solo sailor or thinking of becoming a solo sailor, that's worth bearing in mind, and definitely do your research before buying your boat and setting off.
Esper was she was born in 1989, and so she's well over 20 years, she's an old lady, but she's a fantastically robust and brilliantly built boat. Obviously she's not on Oyster 435. And we've always had fully comprehensive insurance. We still have it now, and it just rolls on year after year. It's not a problem for us.
I'm guessing that of course we are experienced sailors now. That must count for something. And we had a rigging report done a few years ago. That counted for something.
We've got no claims for anything ever, and we've got a lot of experience. And I do wonder if they now take experience into the equation, and rather like the question on there being more and more new boats coming along, I'm wondering if insurance companies are worried about new people coming into the scene and thinking they can go off and do stuff without really knowing what they're doing. So, I don't know, I'm just putting it out there. Maybe insurance companies are not just looking at the boat, they're looking at the owner and the crew. Just a thought.
This is so typical of a late summer, this. Now all the fields have been ploughed. Got this lovely long grass blowing gently in the wind. It turns into a rather splendid afternoon. And actually, this is the kind of environment in which we'll come across skylarks, because that is the sort of thing they like nesting on. Okay, great question here from 24-hour travellers. Having sailed an oyster for so many years, brackets and a big one, I might add, don't think so. Most oysters on the water now are much bigger than Esper.
What do we reckon are our top 3 brands? What's the sweet spot size and why? Right.
How do you want me to answer this question? Do you mean based on my own personal experience of sailing boats, or just, on paper, in principle? I once sailed a Marlow 38 it was, so it's, smaller than Esper, but Marlows, they're a typical blue water Scandinavian boat, and that was a beautiful boat. I don't know what's on the market these days in terms of new Marlows, but I would certainly have considered one of those. A little bit pricey though. We looked at Halberg Rasses and found them to be quite dark. I mean, they're very popular. Again, they're solid blue water cruisers, but I'm not sure that we were happy with the interior of those boats.
I don't really go for brands. I think if I was looking for a boat now, I'd be looking at a type of boat. And the things it would have to have are centre cockpit. Reason for that is you get a lovely big aft cabin, in a mono of course we're talking. Brilliant aft cabin. Oh, just wonderful. Lots of room in there. And then the cockpit itself is in the middle of the boat. A real proper centre cockpit in the middle of the boat gives you the feeling of tremendous safety and security when you're in really bad weather. It's nice and cocooned and just a good place to be. The other thing I'd look for is a ketch. There are many people who've sailed around the world in ketches. They were always flavour of the month and really important boats to have in the olden days. Not so much now. People are tending to go for more lightweight, bigger boats, and they want the speed. Well, for me, cruising isn't about speed, it's about safety. With a ketch, you've got a lot of alternatives for sail plans. And if you add to that a cut-out rig, you've got 2 sails up the front as well. And we just love the ketch, would not have it any other way. You see lots of them around here. And this is an area where you find world travelling sailors, and they know about getting safe boats. So that's what's really important to me. I would probably go for another oyster, except they don't make ketches anymore. Even Amel have stopped making ketches.
Of course, swans. We looked at a couple of swans. I've been on a couple of swans. I've even sailed a swan, actually, thinking about it. And they are rather splendid boats. And you need to go a little bit big on a swan because there's not so much space down below. But I would like a 60-foot swan, I think would be my ideal boat. But in terms of the sweet spot for you know, two of you cruising, really anything that you can comfortably live on. So that could be anything from, say, 36 foot up to 60 foot. I think once you start hitting 60 foot, you're starting to talk about hydraulic sails and push button to operate those much bigger sails that you're going to get on a bigger boat.
The other part of the question was, when we get older, will we downsize? And well, I think the answer to that is probably not. If we're still sailing on the sea, why would we downsize? We've got too much stuff, and where would we put it? But if we ended up being on land somewhere, then I would still want a boat, but it would only be a weekend cruiser. It wouldn't need to be ram-packed with all our belongings. So yeah, I would downsize, and I'd get something lighter and smaller. As long as we could sleep on it and entertain on it, that's all you need. So, strange answers, but that's the truth.
Mark Palmer. Right, Mark, how's it going? He asks, I know it's tight for space on a boat. If you could magically have one thing from living on a house on land, what would it be? What would it be?
It's such an easy answer for me. A pet, a dog or a cat. I can't live without them, and I'm finding it very difficult. We've got 2 tokais, which are fine, but not quite the same as a cat or a dog.
Garden? Garage full of tools, maybe? A nice big galley, really big galley, so that you could have every single kitchen utensil to hand rather than sort of tucked away in a cupboard. And more preparation space as well. That's something that, you know, coming back and staying with my parents, and I see how much food prep space they have versus us, then that's certainly something I think. But honestly, it's not anything that I think about consciously. I don't think, damn, I really miss this from living in a house. And so those are just some answers just off the top of my head, but there's nothing that really sticks out, to be honest.
Do you prefer coastal cruising or ocean cruising? Oh, blimey, what a question.
Very good question. Both. Love both.
I would say that's a bit like chocolate and chips. They're both great under different circumstances. So with ocean cruising, you are on your own, out in the middle of the ocean. There's no land, there's no people, there's no nothing. There's just the sound of the sea and the occasional bird and perhaps the odd dolphin jumping around.
The great thing about offshore is that providing you know, the coast is clear, excuse the pun, you've got nothing to think about. And so you can enjoy much more just being out in the open water with nothing around you. That's the one thing I do love about offshore cruising.
That's on a good day. Of course, on a bad day, you could have some horrendous weather and it could be very hard sailing. Depends what you want, really. But on most ocean crossings, you get a bit of everything, and I love them because it's a time to reflect. There's nothing to do but sail the boat, unless you're a slave to the internet and you feel like you need to be on all the time and have to have Starlink. I'd say it's a great opportunity to get away from all of that.
But of course, with coastal cruising, you get this passing scenery as well. So it's like having a massive flat screen OLED TV in front of you that's constantly changing.
Coastal cruising, for me, it's all about getting to the destination, and it's all about finding new communities and looking for new anchorages and finding that perfect place. So a very different ball game.
It's 50-50 for me. Isn't that beautiful, eh? It is just so typically English. There's a magpie flying off there. One for sorrow. Stefan, the pirate. Did you have any close relations with whom it proved difficult to part? That is a very good question.
When we bought the boat and moved on to her, we were in the Mediterranean, which is very close to the UK. So to nip back and forth from there was easy peasy, and it was cheap. And it was before the days when we all realised that we shouldn't be flying. So we went back to the UK, and our friends and family came out to see us regularly. And so that wasn't really an issue. As we've got further and further away from the UK, and we're practically on the opposite side of the world now, that's become more difficult, and our visitors have become fewer. Also, it's too expensive for us both to be going back all the time, so we don't get to see as much of them as we would like.
It is something that I battled with for years, honestly. On the one hand, there was always that feeling of sense of adventure and excitement going off and doing what we did. But at the same time, there was always that feeling that you're leaving family behind. As I said earlier, I have a close family, and that's not just my immediate family, that's my cousins as well. And saying goodbye to them was difficult.
It's getting more difficult for Jamie as his parents get older and his nieces and nephews are growing up without him, so he goes back more frequently now than I do. But yeah, I can see that with some people that might be a real factor in where you go on your boat and how far away from home you go.
Going to answer this question walking backwards so that you can see my face. Richard Lawson says, I would love to know if you've seen any impacts from the growth in Liverpool sailing. It seems with COVID, there was an explosion in the sales of boats and interest in cruising.
He's worried that there are too many people on the water, many of whom don't have much experience, and he wonders if this is the same in the Pacific. Has there been any effect on remote and local communities and cultures is a third part of his question.
At least on YouTube, it seems more are interested in kiteboarding and less on culture. Well, to answer that last bit of your question first, I'd say don't go by what you see on YouTube. It's really not a ideal way of judging what the sailing community is like. Of course, there was a major impact on COVID. In fact, I would say it was the reverse.
I'd be interested to know where you get your facts and figures from, because I have been looking for those and can't find them anywhere. So if you can let me know how you know that, if it's not just anecdotal, I'll be really interested. As far as this area goes, I haven't particularly noticed any more. What I would say is that a local friend of ours who's on the main route from Australia to Malaysia and back, it goes back and forth every year, there's a rally. He says he's seeing far fewer boats coming through, possibly as a result of the 2-year shutdown we had over here. I
think a lot of boats got left abandoned. Quite a few people sold their boats immediately afterwards, realising that they had missed their family. And of course, as we know, it has massively impacted the communities as well. We've seen that, and it's something that we do highlight whenever we see that, and we've been doing that for the last couple of years. It's had a big impact on the local communities.
When we look around, we see a lot of places have closed and there's not so much action going on, but it is starting to get better. So I would say actually the reverse is probably true here. Haven't noticed any more cruises and anchorages. There's so many places we go to where we're the only ones there. So no, not on this side of the world, but interested to know why you think on that side of the world things have changed.
I suppose, yes, you could argue that people took stock of their daily lives under lockdown and COVID and realised that they don't need to be at work, as in go to an office to work. And there are perhaps a larger proportion of younger people who now realise that they can actually continue to work and earn money while sailing because they can work remotely. And that is definitely something that can't be argued simply because of the internet. It does make it a lot easier to do that. Are they less experienced? Look, I'll tell you something. The worst person I ever sailed with, who was an absolute clown, was an ex-commodore of a sailing club in his 70s. So I don't think young equates to inexperienced. It's much more about state of mind and, dropping that ego and arrogance and being willing to learn. And that can be done at any age, to be honest. And do they prefer kite surfing to culture? I don't know. Maybe they only film the kite surfing because it's more exciting and gets more clicks on YouTube. But that doesn't mean to say that they are not going out and getting the culture as well. But I don't know. It's difficult for me to say. And of course, as you know, with Liz and myself, we are very much about the culture. I said I was going to answer that question walking backwards, and I didn't. So I'll finish off by walking backwards. What
I would say is that fishing villages and small communities that we visit, which are off the beaten track and are not used to tourists, some of which have never even seen a yacht, are friendly, open, welcoming and lovely, and always extremely excited to see us, particularly when Jamie walks around with a camera. They are just lovely. They are the best thing about this area. When you go to somewhere where there's lots of tourism, or somewhere where lots of yachts go, perhaps on the rally, regular stops there, you get calls from children of money, 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 people trying to sell you stuff, all the sort of stuff you see in Bali on the beach, bits of old tatty jewellery and bits and bobs and stuff like that. You don't get that in the out of the way places. So it's a very different feel. Not to say they aren't all lovely, they're just as lovely in the tourist areas, but it has a very definite difference to it. One word of advice to cruisers coming through this area: pay the local rate and what they've asked you to pay. Don't pay more. Quite often we think when we come here, oh, it's a lot cheaper, I'll give them an extra tip or I'll pay double. It's not good for you, for them, or for the people who follow. Prices will go up, which is, I suppose, fine for the local community. But they start to realise that they can make a lot of money out of tourists. And they start to think that this is normal, this is what they should be doing. And then you get a real sort of money-grabbing community feel, which is not natural to this area. So that's my tuppence. I would just say, just be normal with the local people and they'll be normal with you.
Static shot this one, just so you can take in the scenery if you're bored of looking at my face. John Young, 68, says, if you could go back to when you both started your journey on this boat.
That's a long time ago, John.
What's one thing that you would have done differently? Brackets, if any. I think that brackets is quite important actually, because off the top of my head, honestly, I can't think of anything that we would have done differently. Seriously.
I had to think about this earlier and I couldn't come up with a single thing. The only thing I came up with is that I would do it earlier. I would have started this adventure as soon as I possibly could.
Another static shot, this time answered in this little clearing among the chest-high grass here. Jessica Nazar says, or asks, what are some of the worst storms or weather you have sailed through or been in? Also, who is more nervous about bad weather? Well, it's funny you should ask that question, Jessica, because
the most recent one probably is right up there, and that was going along through the Java Sea.
As you know, these Q&As are in between our weekly or bi-weekly sailing vlogs. And you are about to see one of the worst storms we've ever been through. In next week's episode.
We had a storm, well, a gale really, it lasted 24 hours. It included plenty of water spouts. Whoa. I counted 5 at one stage, and a complete whiteout with the sound of what appeared to be a train going above us. And that was a first. We've never ever heard anything like that.
However, I do say you are about to see. There's only so much footage that we took of that. One of the problems that we have with doing the videoing is that we don't always have a camera to hand, or more importantly, don't have the inclination to film anything when the shit is hitting the fan. And that's exactly the case with next week's storm. We got quite a bit of footage, but the worst footage, or rather the worst weather we got, there won't be footage because I'm too busy clinging onto the steering wheel.
Sadly, we weren't able to record it because we were too busy trying to sail the boat. The wind was very high. Our wind instrument wasn't working. We still haven't fixed it. It's just the top of the mast. We just need to get up there and fix that. So we didn't know what the speed was. And to be honest, I think it was quite good not knowing what the speed was, because I think I'd have been really scared. We had about an inch of sail out and we were whizzing along. So yeah, there are lots and lots of storms. It does get easier, to be honest with you, when you first discover storms firsthand. It is a bit scary. But if you've got a well-found boat and you have confidence in your boat, then it's not a problem. And Esper, of course, she is built like a brick shithouse, as I always say. She is solid as a rock, and she is made to go through that sort of stuff. And she sort of thrives on storms, to be honest with you. She does really, really well. Some
of the worst weather we've been in typically are the really quick squalls that happen, the Sumatras that you get, where you get winds of, can be up to 60 knots. And they're unpredicted. Of course, we did our Indian Ocean crossing in some pretty heavy weather, but it was consistent. It was 2 weeks worth. If you remember, it was hand steering as well without autopilot. It's pretty tough and grueling, but the seas were fairly consistent. Even though it was squall after squall after squall and pretty big waves, it was consistent. It's those nasty squalls that you get that sort of hit you at 3 o'clock in the morning when you least expect it. And the one next week is definitely in our top 3 worst squalls we have ever been in.
I'm not really scared in a storm. I think probably of the two of us, I am the one that gets the most scared, but it's normally the anticipation. That's the bit when I get scared. When I'm in it, I don't really worry too much. When we can see that we're going to be going into a thunderstorm, and we wouldn't necessarily point at a thunderstorm, but sometimes we're in areas, particularly in this part of the world, where there's just thunder everywhere, lightning everywhere. I always think, oh God, not again, here we go. But you just get through it. And I think Jamie would probably say me, but maybe he's better at covering up his fear.
Can you see that crow up there? He's sort of sitting above the branches of that dead tree. There he goes. There's quite a few crows around here. I think it's a crow and not a rook. We do also, of course, get rooks as well. That actually brings me nicely onto a question from someone who we know is a queen birder, or twitcher as we call them in the UK, because he asked the question last time about bird watching. And that's Jordan of Flomads, and he asked about bum washes.
Right, bum guns. First of all, yes, get a bum gun. If you haven't already got one, really easy. You can do what we did in the refit. The basin is right next to the loo. In fact, if you're watching, I'm sitting on the loo right now.
For the uninitiated, a bum wash or a bum gun is a hose pipe that sits by the side of your toilet, and they are used as an alternative to wiping your bum with toilet paper. And Liz and I love them. They make absolute sense because you come away fresh, sparkly and clean.
In the basin there is a tap which has an extendable shower head on it, just like you get in hairdressers. So you can pull this right out and you can wash whatever bit of your body you fancy. And having it right next to the loo means I can use it every time. And same for Jamie, we go to the loo, we clean our bottoms, which is something we've done since we bought the boat in Turkey. We just got used to having some method or other for washing yourself after you've been to the loo. It's really common over here.
I honestly don't understand why we don't use them in the West. For some reason, we have it in our heads that using toilet paper is far more hygienic than using a jet to clean your bottom. And that's just not the case. In London, we have problems now with our ancient Victorian sewage network. We have these great big, what are they called? They're called lard biscuits or something. You get these fat biscuits, these great big congealed lumps of fat as big as double-decker buses that are clogging up our sewages. And part of that is as a result of people flushing all kinds of crap, and I mean the other kind of crap, not the normal crap, down the toilet. And if you just used a bum wash, if you just used water to clean your bum, we wouldn't have that problem.
And to be honest, they find it quite horrendous that in the West we just wipe ourselves with a bit of paper. They think we're pretty dirty. So here you go, get a bum gun, good as gold, sorted.
One of the problems with using a bum wash in the colder climates is that I imagine it would get a little bit chilly around the willy because you walk away from the toilet with a wet bum. In the tropics, that isn't a problem. But seriously, why don't we have bum guns in Europe? I do not understand it. The French were onto something with bidets.
Compost loos, slightly different. I think they're a nice idea in theory, but did you know that disposing of compost is for human waste as compost? You should let it do its thing for a year before you do that. I've been looking into it, and to be honest, I don't think composting is the answer, particularly on a heeling moving boat. I think you're better off doing what we do, which is have a holding tank and you let that go out at sea. And whenever you're on land, you use the facilities on land. So yeah, for me, composting loo, no, not on a sailboat.
They do say that when yachties get together, invariably the conversation will turn to toilets. It is a certainty.
Colin Mills asks about finances. He says, how do you stay in touch with your finances? Being in transit, I can only get a pay-as-you-go SIM and can't make international phone calls. I'm gradually sorting it out, but I'm still down to one working debit card.
Well, you know, that is something we've seen a change over the last 20 years, both the banking and also SIM cards. SIM cards is easy. You just get a local SIM card. That's all you need to do. And when you get a local SIM, especially in Asia, you need to take your passport in And unfortunately, in Indonesia, you have to register your IMEI number as well. But you can always buy a cheap local phone. But yeah, local SIMs, it's so cheap. It's just not worth the hassle of trying to keep an international SIM card. Unless, of course, it's locked into your banking. So both Liz and I have UK SIM cards as well. These phones are dual SIM card phones. So we have one UK SIM and one Indonesian SIM. And we just top up the UK one just so we don't lose the telephone number, because our banking is sort of tied into those numbers.
Our banking is all through apps, it's occasionally online using the laptop. Yeah, I've had problems when suddenly there's been some kind of security issue and they've stopped the card. And in the past, what I've done when Twitter was Twitter is I've contacted them there and they've sorted it out.
One of the problems that we had when we started moving around between Malaysia and Indonesia was that they kept sort of putting temporary freezes on our cards, because it appeared quite random where we were spending our money on the cards as we crossed borders. They now understand that we are often in transit, so we don't really have that much of a problem anymore. The problem is when your card gets cloned. I know Liz has had problems, and only recently she had a card that had only been issued, was sitting at our house in the UK, sorry, my parents' house in the UK. She hadn't even opened the envelope and used the card, and somehow someone somewhere in the world had cloned her card and made some transactions. And of course, when those kind of things happen, then that card gets cancelled. You have to issue a new one, and they will only send it to your home address. Fortunately, I have very understanding parents who are happy to hold on to those, and they'll either DHL them over to us, or we wait until we come back to UK to pick those cards up.
Generally, I give them explain the situation, give them my number, and they ring me straight back, as long as the number tallies with the number that they've got. So you have to keep updating your SIM to the bank so they know your new number, so they know it's you. But it's not been a problem, and I hope you get your problem resolved soon. Generally, SIMs are the way forward, and banking apps, I'd say.
And of course, we have NFC on the phone. That is all over Asia now, so quite easy to go into shops and just tap the phone on their little machines by the countertop. Most young people, certainly around Asia, are paying this way. And in fact, since being back in the UK, I haven't got any cash out and just don't carry cash with me anymore. There are lots of moral issues on that, aren't there? A cashless society. I know that's something that perhaps people might want to discuss in the comments.
Barbara asks, have there been any anchorages we've been in that we felt unsafe? If you mean in respect of safety for our personal selves and theft and so forth, then...
No, actually.
I've never felt like that anywhere, actually. I don't think. Nothing springs to mind which tells me you probably haven't.
Again, can't think of any off the top of my head where we have felt unsafe. As you know, we talk about this a lot, about how kind and welcoming Asian people, Southeast Asian people are. I think you're more likely to feel unsafe in a more touristic spots, and there may be spots around busy places, like Thailand. I do know of yachties that have had run-ins in a busy anchorage, normally late at night when you are confronting drunk people who are quite aggressive. But in terms of people actually coming on the boat, no, never.
Do I feel unsafe because the boat is insecure? Yeah, there have been some anchorages. The ones that spring to mind are where we are anchored in a lovely anchorage, but there are lots of big boats around us, because I always worry that the wind will pick up, usually in the middle of the night, and there'll be a really nasty blow and they might drag onto us. That is the biggest safety problem I worry about in anchorages, which is why I don't really like Kwa down in Langkawi. It's a busy anchorage, there's loads and loads of boats. They have big winds coming through there quite often, Sumatras they're called, they go up to 40 knots occasionally, and somebody will always drag. Well, there'll always be a few boats dragging. So that's the biggest security risk for me when it comes to anchorages.
Well, I hope you found that interesting, and I hope you appreciate this wonderful Essex countryside. That's the end of this week's Q&A. Next week, don't forget, we are going to be going back to our sailing passage up the Java Sea when we hit those nasty squalls we were talking about earlier. And if you do have any questions, then pop them in the comments and we will do our best to answer them, either in the comments or in the next video that we put out where we answer your questions. That's your questions, us answering them, not us asking you the questions. So you know what I mean. Oh look, sun's out again. Hit like and subscribe, do all that usual bollocks. You know the score. But also hit that notification bell, because as we saw from last week, someone thought that we were no longer putting out sailing videos when we were. They just hadn't seen them. So by hitting the notification bell, you guarantee that you get notified when we bring out next week's video, all about those nasty, horrible squalls.